Humanities in 2005. She's a poet, a novelist, playwright, and author of children's literature. Professor Adimora Ezegbo was also the Vice President of Women Writers Association of Nigeria. She sits on the board of the University Press PLC Ibadan, and she's currently a member of the Governing Council of the National Institute for Nigerian Languages, ABA. In 2011, she was the chair of the panel of judges for the Nigeria Prize for Literature, and she's the winner of the African Literature Association Best Short Story Award 2020 for her story, The President's Change Agent. For many years, she has taught different courses on gender and African literature at the University of Lagos and elsewhere. She has also written several works on the subject, including Trafficked, which is a novel, and gender issues in Nigeria. Professor Ezigbo, it's such a pleasure to have you on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and I identify with what is happening here today.
Thank you. Thank you for your presence. Our second panelist is Mr. Tunde Babalola. Tunde Babalola is a renowned scriptwriter who wrote his first film script at the age of 14. His professional writing career spans both the Nigerian cinema and British television series. He is the creator of the UK Channel 4 sitcom series titled In Exile. He has worked for BBC, Carlton TV, and Chrysalis Television. An alumnus of Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, where he studied dramatic art, Mr. Babalola wrote the script for Nollywood blockbusters like October 1, The CEO, Mokalik, and the movie for which we have gathered here today to discuss, Kunle Afolayan's Citation. Mr. Babalola, it's a great privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our third panelist is Dr. Lola Akode, who is an academic and a writer. She earned a doctorate in English from the University of Ibadan. She currently teaches African literature in the Department of English at the University of Lagos. Her area of specialization is literatures of the city, and other research interests include feminist activism, cultural studies, post-colonial studies, and literary theory. Dr. Akande has conducted extensive research in representations of urban spaces in the African novel. Her book, The City in the African Novel, a thematic rendering of urban spaces, published in 2019, critically analyzes 16 African novels, which she believes are representative of city trends. She has to her credit 3 novels, including Where Are You From? And the award-winning What It Takes. She recently published a collection of short stories, Suitors Are Scarce in Lagos, and she mentors students in academic and creative writing. Dr. Akonde, we are so glad to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Akonde. By way of introducing our next panelist, Dr. Abimbola Adelakun, there is an excerpt from an opinion piece she wrote, which just suggests to us an aspect of the work she does. I will quote, "In the last few days, I have come across so much talk about feminism that I am ready to make an exception. Just once to talk about feminism, just this once to inform those who have badly received feminism. We need them to understand that feminism is not about mundane exchanges about whether a man or his wife is supposed to cook. That feminism does not begin and end with Facebook posts. That feminism does not threaten the perfect African culture, quote unquote, or African marriage, quote unquote, that endlessly rhapsodized about. Instead, what it does is open their eyes to the imbalances that they are willfully blind to." End of quote. Dr. Abimbola Adelakun is an assistant professor at the University of Texas, Austin, She is a columnist for the Nigerian newspaper outlet, The Punch. Dr. Adelakun, thank you for joining this conversation today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with everyone.
Thank you. So our fifth panelist is Astu Gay. She is a PhD candidate in the Department of African Cultural Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She earned her MA in Literary Studies at the University of Gaston-Berger in St. Louis, Senegal. Her current work investigates how diasporic Senegalese femininities are shaped and negotiated through Jonge, a Wolof concept involving a set of practices that have enacted idealized womanhood and eroticized femininity. Other areas of interest are literature, film studies, feminist theory, and popular culture. Astu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Astu. So finally, we have an anonymous panelist. Because of their positionality to the topic we are discussing today, they have decided to be anonymous. So thank you for joining us. So diving right into the questions. Because we will open the floor to questions from our audiences. But before that, our first question goes to the panelists. Citation deals with a very serious issue. No doubt, it is really about Moremi's tortuous journey toward seeking justice, a journey that the viewer also experiences vicariously. But thanks to the director's deft handling of the story. In this movie, we see power, we see knowledge, we see privilege at play. The first part of my question goes to the scriptwriter, Mr. Babalola. Mr. Babalola, can you give us a sense of what you had in mind when you were writing this script? How did you envision the interplay of power, knowledge, and privilege?
Hello, can I be heard? Can you guys hear me? Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. So, okay, good. It's great to be here on this kind of panel. It's really interesting. When writing the screenplay, what happened was that I think Kunle said to me he wants to do Kunle Afolayan, the director, said he wants to do a film about sexual harassment. And then I said, well, where? In the workplace, in school, or where? And he said, well, I should pick an area where I think it could be best put to use. And I decided to pick the academic area, school, school by institution, because I felt like it plays out there in a very unique way, in the sense that it differs from the workplace, in the sense that students go to school to learn. And under normal circumstances, there should be a really close interaction, especially when you're starting to do courses like your master's and your PhD, like some of you are already doing right now. You find out it's the higher you go in the institution of higher learning, the closer you become to your lecturers. You're doing your first degree, you may not even ever have a one-on-one with your lecturer. But when you're doing your master's and PhD, you tend to have more one-on-one sessions with your lecturers or your course supervisors. So I just felt I want to do a film. I want to write a script where students come in a master's degree program. She's got a certain amount of knowledge. At the same time, there's every excuse to be close to a lecturer, because working on your thesis or your dissertation, you have to have one-on-one sessions with a lecturer, and then find a lecturer who has a certain amount of power, this guy is not just an ordinary lecturer, he's a lecturer who's, quite renowned and, quite sought after, and he comes there into university as a star already, and everybody's kind of like drawn to him. And obviously he takes advantage of this. I want to show that sexual harassment is more about power than about anything else. It's about a person being in a position of power, using that power to harass or oppress someone in a junior position. And in the hands of a director that wouldn't have known how to handle it, it could have gone so wrong. Trust me, even with a good script. But I think what Kunle Afolayan did, he brought that that tenderness that this kind of subject matter needed. He brought it to the fore, and that's how the film came out as good as I think it came out.
Thank you so much for for this response. And you've made some interesting points and revelations that we might come back to.
Sure.
But now I would like to go to the other panelists. I will begin from Professor Ezigbo, and then I'll move on to Dr. Akonde, and then Dr. Adelakun, and then Astu. How do you define power, knowledge, privilege on the one hand, and on the other, how do you see this network play out in the film? I'll begin with Professor Ezigbo.
Well, power, to me, it means influence and authority. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Yes, I'm saying that power means influence and authority. And when you have power, sometimes you also have imbalance of power. Somebody, especially when you are dealing with two people, one person is the one that has power and the other person has less power or no power at all. And that is the scenario we have in the film. In the university system, I mean, this issue can happen anywhere, in the workplace, in the theater, in the film industry, but we are focusing on the university system. Usually the authority is vested on management and then the professors and lecturers, and the student is so to say powerless. She doesn't have much power. This is why you begin with this imbalance, and that is what allows harassment to occur. If somebody has power over another, that person can easily sexually harass the other person, as we can see in the case of Professor Lucien and Moremi, the postgraduate student. The lecturer, by virtue of age and status, is much higher than the student, and therefore he has authority. And that is why, even when she resented his sexual overtures, she could not challenge him, or, she has to be very tactful, even in saying no, until the last stage where she had to hit out at him, cripple him somewhat to escape from his house. So power always is about influence. And that is why it's very important that we use power properly. When we abuse power, it becomes a problem for everybody, not only at individual level, even in the nation. So power must be handled properly, is about influence. And when you use your influence well, for instance, a professor has power and can use that influence over the student, to influence the student, help them to learn, to gain knowledge. But when you take advantage of them by introducing sexual overtones, and asking for promising them things like Lucian promised Moremi to help her get a job at the United Nations and to pass her, help her with her project. That promise alone gives him the authority or even the inclination to ask for sexual favors, because he believes that if he's going to do these things for her, she should also do something for him. So power and the way we use power is very important. And for me, the way I use my power in the classroom or with my students is to use it for their benefit, to teach them, to give them, to help them acquire knowledge and assist them with material. And it stops there. When a lecturer goes beyond that, it's now using power in a very abusive manner. And we can see even this is the worst use of power, because he does not only use sexual overtones and improper talks or addresses, addressing her improperly, but he even goes to the extreme extent of attacking her, assaulting her in his house. So this is total abuse of power. And then knowledge, of course, if I understand what you mean, I think again, knowledge is relative. I mean, the lecturer, the professor is assumed to know much and to have knowledge, which he needs to impart to students. And then also the system itself is supposed to exude knowledge in the university system. Knowledge is the most important thing because students are there to acquire knowledge and they are to be helped to do so. Then, of course, you talk about privilege. The student coming there is paying fees, so it's not really a privilege for the student to be there, but the student has a right to be treated properly, to be given knowledge, because he's paid fees or she's paid fees, and like the script writer said, I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. When the student is there, should not be molested because she wants to relate closely to her professor, which is quite natural, and she doesn't do it inappropriately. She only wants to learn from him. When this man was introduced in the class by the dean, he gave him very good introduction, and we know really that he was a very good professor, very knowledgeable. He has experience, and therefore students tend to gain a lot from him. But he abuses all of this. The knowledge he has is to be beneficial to his students, but he abused it. Maybe I should stop here and allow others to make an input.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Isegbo. Thank you so much. I would move on to Dr. Akonde and then Dr. Adelakun and then Asto. We can't hear you. At least I can't.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. So power, knowledge, and privilege. First, power is the ability to do something. You have the capacity to do something, which probably not everybody has the ability to do that thing. Knowledge is being in possession of information, of skills, of things that somebody else might not have. You have information, you have skill, you have facts, and maybe you are the only person in possession of all of this. And privilege is a special position you enjoy. You can do things that others cannot do. It's a special position to be able to do something that others may not be in the same position to do. You have the privilege to do these things. Now, what is interesting here is that in the university environment, the university lecturer has all the three, and the university student has none. So the university lecturer has power, he can do and undo, he has the ability to do what he wishes to do, and he has the ability not to do whatever it is that he does not wish to do, even when these things are right, and nobody is going to question him because he occupies a particular position. The university lecturer has knowledge, he has experience, he has gone to school, he has acquired a particular skill, he has acquired competence, and the university student has not. The university student is coming to acquire. So the university student looks up to the university lecturer to be able to get what the university lecturer has. And of course, the privilege. The student does not have any privilege. All privileges belong to university lecturer. So in a university environment, the university lecturer has power, he has knowledge, he has privilege, and the university student does not have any of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Adelakun.
Hi, thank you very much. I think we've all heard this cliche, knowledge is power, right? We've heard it so many times. Knowledge itself is a form of power. But when we were growing up and telling us to go to school because knowledge is power, what they didn't tell us is that in the process of acquiring it, you could enter into a space where that power will be used on you, right? And that's what we saw in this film, right? That there's some people who take the power that knowledge has given to them and then they become authoritarians. It's we've always wanted to believe, or we should have been able to take it for granted that when people have knowledge, they also have a power that should humble them. But it doesn't always work that way. There are always people that always take it out of they overdo it, they become authoritarians. So to the second part of your question is, how does this play out in the film? I think to a lot of extent, it is in the informal relationships that happen between lecturer and student. That's where it mostly played out. Now, usually abuse happens because there is an enabling culture in the institution, right? Which we did not quite see in Citation. Right? You see all those things muted. Like abuse would not have succeeded to the extent it has without people who facilitate it. But you don't see that. But where this film spotlights is in the informal relationship that you develop with people that have power in the process of trying to acquire knowledge that will empower you. So usually we've seen that happen so many times between male professors and male students, right? You can enter into their private spaces because let's face it, and even as today Babalola mentioned, when you go to advanced degree, you start to develop a relationship with your professors, which is different from what it is at undergraduate level. Now, so we see this master student, Moremi, who has certain ambitions, right? And then you find this professor who is brilliant, is well-traveled, he has been all over the world. He's basically a figure of power. And then he comes into this place and then he reaches out to you, which is very, for a young person, right? That's something to cherish. And then she starts to get into these personal spaces with him in his car. She gets into his office. Office is still a formal space. But the moment the both of them switch to French, right, a language that other people don't speak around them, it becomes an informal space. They start to share spaces. And like I said, male students have done this with professors for so many years. That is how they've been able to learn things, because everything you learn as a graduate student does not happen in the classroom. It happens in this mentoring in relationship, in non-formal places where some things happen and then your professor has this spontaneous burst of knowledge through which he can lecture you or mentor you. But once a female student enters into that space and she starts to perform some kind of roles, right? Like teaching the professor how to drive his car and things like that, it changes the structure of the relationship, and then it puts her in this hyper vulnerable position. So how does a female student mediate that kind of relationship? Where do you go from there? We cannot rightly say, don't move near professors. They're not supposed to be animals, right? They're supposed to be human, rational human beings who have acquired rational knowledge. But it's also those places where you go and the things that you have to do while you are there, or the way you have to act, that also makes you very vulnerable. And that's one, for me, one of the most interesting part of the film.
Thank you. Thank you. Asto?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for your definitions. So I think for me, throughout the movie, power is very much linked to status. And I think that is because of the different influences that the female student or any other student comes in the university institution. I don't know if this is similar to what is happening in the Anglophone or the Nigerian context, but within the Francophone context, there's this discourse about the professor being literally God, and whatever he says is okay, it's true. You should just take it for granted. That ideology of the master Dixit, I think, is also supported by certain beliefs that are linked to this intersection of gender and age, etc., etc. So all those things combined together kinds of gives you a cocktail of abuse, because of the structure is already there. So it is very easy for a professor to be involved in this type of relation and this type of controlling of your student over the way you interact with them. And I think throughout the movie, where we see power is within language use. What is being said how it is being said and who is saying it. So language is used across the movie to reinforce and maintain this power structure by individuals and also by the university as an institution itself. So that way, it's very tricky for a female subject in this case to kind of even stood up for themselves or voice their disagreement or their anger towards what is happening. So I'll stop there and then we can develop more into.
That's so very, very wonderful. And thank you. Thank you. And thank you to every other person who have spoken. I will let Mosum Mola do a follow-up question on privilege. But before then, this program is possible because of African writer, the African writer group. So they are responsible for the publicity for this program. So we want to say thank you to africanwriter.com for their support. Mosum, take it away.
Thank you very much. So, just on the subject of privilege and also on power to some extent, we see that Moremi, she's the daughter of a diplomat. She's proficient in French, and she could also travel to, different places in search of evidence. And she can also speak the language of a potential witness. And I think this is quite interesting to see how privilege plays in this movie. So my question then is, like, from your own perspective, how does access, privilege and resources, or the lack of it, how can these things, liberate or suppress the victim? Especially when the victim is, someone who is not of the same social standing as Moremi. So this question is to all the panelists.
Can I say something here?
Yes, please.
You see, Moremi is she's a special kind of student. Many students do not have the kind of background she has, and that alone empowers her. That was why she was able to speak up. Many students don't speak up when they are sexually harassed. I remember when I was in the system, or when I was the head of department at Unilag, some girls will come to complain that they were being sexually harassed. And as the head of department, I will immediately say, please, are you willing to write a report to complain? I will take it up. And the student would say, no, 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 don't you want me to graduate? No, I can't, please. And I said, then why have you come to report to me? So this is Moremi's background empowers her to complain. You see, she could have kept quiet. She could even have consented out of fear, or out of the fact that she might not get that United Nations job, or that she might not graduate in the first place. And she's such an ambitious young woman. She wants to go places. She knows what she wants, and she wants to live her life. But she didn't succumb because she knew there's this alternative, that she could speak up. So that is part of the privilege she has by virtue of the fact that she comes from that background. Her father, as a diplomat, must have traveled far and wide and taken her perhaps to these places. So she has come, she comes to do postgraduate studies with that knowledge, with that confidence that she can go anywhere and voice out her complaints and say what she doesn't like. Even when Professor Lucien was sexually harassing her, she made every effort to put him in his place. So that is what the background she has, and then the privilege she has. What about many other students who come from a poor background? Sometimes money is borrowed to pay their fees, and they are there. All they want is just to get their degree and go out and leave the system and find a job or go on to other things they want to do. Now, some such students are very vulnerable. Sometimes they succumb, not because they really want to, but out of fear, as I said, out of fear, or the fact that they are their degrees could be endangered, and there's this threat that they might not graduate. And it is possible also that it's their word against the word of the lecturer or the professor. And you agree with me that in Citation, if not for Moremi being of her thoughtfulness and her intelligence that made her take the decision to travel to Senegal again, a second time on her own. How many students could do that? Go on her own and find this wonderful witness, the technologists, lab technologists, who actually made the difference. You see, it was already as if the case was going against her. But this witness came and made all the difference. How many students are in a position to do that? Let me stop here so that others can.
Thank you very much. Yes, do we have someone else wants to respond to that question?
I will. Thank you, Musu. I think apart from the things that you highlighted about our background, about our social status or family status, is the question of the power that knowledge gave her, right? So we're looking at a student that is exceptionally brilliant. And while I admire that, I also find it very problematic in several ways, right? So one of the reasons she could get out of that situation, she could make a defense, was because she's this uber brilliant student, very outspoken, very assertive. What if she was a struggling student, right? What tools, what empowering tools does a film or does an institution give to students that are struggling? Some of the things you hear during the Sex for Grade scandal is like, oh, it's only poor students, struggling students that go to sleep with their lecturers for grades, right? But what exactly is the problem with being a struggling student, right? You're in a university space, you're in an academic space to learn. Some people go into the university fully made, right? There's nothing new for them to learn. But some other people come in, they are weak, they have weaker background, they are intimidated by the space, all kinds of things are not working for them at that time, right? And so those are the ones that if they try to seek help from their teachers, then they say, oh, it's because they're not bright enough. But we have this student that's really so bright. And by the time they started to investigate, they say, oh, she's so good. Dissertation has been shared with some other people, and then they can verify that she was good. And if it had been otherwise, that means the things that the professor said against her might have stood, which is a problem. But I think the lesson to take away from it is to always keep our eyes open and not make certain kinds of argument against weaker or struggling students. Not everybody has the privilege of being very brilliant academically, or they can think on their feet, or they can write very excellent dissertation. Some struggle through all of those processes. Some, their level of intelligence or comportment or the ability to handle themselves is not necessarily something that you see when they're in the school, in the university. It doesn't mean that they're dull or they are not serious student. It just means they need extra help. And it could be that extra help that they are seeking, and then they get abused by vulnerable lecturer. One thing I always tell friends that are male lecturers when they raise that issue of students come to them and then they offer sex, like they say, oh, sometimes even female students offer sex in exchange for grades. And I tell them, like, for a student to look at you and offer you sex, it means she has discounted the knowledge that you have to offer, right? And it says the level of respect that she has for you. So it is up to you to reject. There's no good excuse for saying that she asked me, right? She has devalued everything that you represent. You give her the syllabus and say, this is it. Like, these are the things that requirements you need to fulfill to graduate or to pass my class. And then she says, let me give you sex in exchange for it. It's a devaluation of knowledge, and you should be offended on that account. So that excuse doesn't wash with me, right? That is somebody that is because they're not brilliant. You don't have to be brilliant if you're in university. I mean, not everybody can be brilliant in the way we're supposed to be superlative, right? And so we must always keep our eyes open for all those nuances and not just make these broad sweeping arguments about good student, bad student. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Okay, can I say something? Can I be heard?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's great contribution from Dr. Lakun and from Professor Zebo. I think when I started, I think you remember the very first scene in the film was about a student who had also just gone through being sexually harassed, and she took matters into her own hands by luring the professor to a hotel, and her boyfriend and a couple of other guys came down there and beat the hell out of him and he ran into the middle of the traffic and got knocked over by a car. There are instances that have happened in universities here in Nigeria where students lure, well, I should put it this way, a lecturer tries to sexual, offers the students grades for sex. Then the student lures into a hotel. I think happening, I can't remember, it was Ekpoma University, some university some years ago. And they came, and when he was there, he already half dressed, and then some guys came later on, beat him up, and they put it on YouTube, and the whole incident came on YouTube. And then the university came around later on and suspended the lecturer, and they also suspended all the students involved. I took that and made that my very first scene in the film to show an instance of students taking matters into their own hands when they can't find recourse from the proper areas. But that system is wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. And in the film and in real life, those students got rusticated from university. In Morimi's case, she is a privileged student in the sense that she comes from a wealthy family. She could travel out the country and fight for it. But I don't think that's the reason why she fought. I don't think she fought because she comes from a place of wealth or she comes from an affluent family. I think she fought because she's determined to see justice. I think if that lecturer had not come from Senegal, if that lecturer, the whole film was shot in OAU, and the OAU is a setting, my alma mater, Great Ife. My OAU is, my university is a setting for the university. If that lecturer had come from, say, Oshobo, which is like an hour away from the campus, or he'd been lecture at University of Ibadan, and he came down to OAU to lecture, a student without a lot of money could spend 2,000 naira to go to Ibadan to investigate, to find out whether this guy had sexually harassed female students in UI. The fact that, so in this instance in the film, she had got away to Senegal. But in another situation, I could have made him a lecturer from University of Ibadan. She could take University of Ibadan to Ife is about 1 hour, and she could have gone there and investigated. So I don't think it's about wealth, about Morimi being wealthy. I think it's about Morimi being a fighter. The reason I chose the name Morimi for the character was because it goes back to the whole Morimi Ajasoro character in heroine in real life history, who saved the town of Ilefe from invaders, from foreign invaders. And I chose that name to show that she's a lion. She's a heroine. She's going to go after him. It wasn't so much a question of her coming from a wealthy background or her father being a retired diplomat. She traveled around the world. It's more of a question of her determination to see this to the end. She's a fighter, and she's gonna, she might have lost it, but she's gonna lose it by fighting. She's gonna go down fighting. So it's more a question of her empowering herself as a person to fight to the end, as opposed to her coming from a privileged background. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. And I think, this idea of Moremi being fearless and really determined is further represented through our last name, which is Oluwa. And I think it was one of the organizers of this discussion that pointed out that Oluwa actually means the subject in Yoruba. So she's this subject, she's the prime figure, and I think that's a really good point. So as to and Dr. Akonde and also our anonymous panelists, do you want to contribute to this?
Okay, so let me say something. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I find citation very significant in many ways. For me, it reinforces some of the things we already know, which is, among which is one, that those who have power will always use it, and that they tend to use it in any way, they please. And that the power dynamics is always slanted in favor of men, whether in the workplace, whether in the family, whether in political associations, whether in the university, wherever. And therefore, that women must always be vigilant, they must always be at alert, they must always be ready to fight, which is what we see Moremi do. Now, when we talk about privilege, as I mentioned earlier, university lecturers have privileges. The university itself has a huge privilege. And lecturers are known to assign privileges to students that they favor. So they could choose you to be the class rep, even when students have chosen a class rep. For their particular course, they might say, it is this lady I want to be representing you. And they give all manner of privileges. Now, this is why the university system must erect institutions within the university that must be effective in cases of sexual assault, as we see, in Citation. But majority of Nigerian students are afraid. This fear kills whatever privileges that may be available to them. So this film, encourages female students to be fearless. It encourages female students to stand and defend their honor, in the way that they know how. So I agree with the last speaker who said it is not because Moremi comes from a powerful family. It is not because she comes from, a wealthy family or whatever. It is because she's determined to fight. And this is the spirit I think Citation is trying to, give to all female students, to have this kind of fighting spirit. That in the end, it doesn't matter how long, but if you are determined and you are ready to fight, it's going to work. Now, the film also, in my view, encourages us to ensure that evidence is not lost when there are cases of sexual assault. For instance, I watched a series in which there is this serial rapist. He will go into homes, he will go into a particular home, where, of course, not in Nigeria, in societies where people can go to bed and leave their door open. So he will go there, the first time we see him, he goes into this lady's house, the door is open, he ties her with her shoelaces, and then he repeatedly rapes her, like 3-4 times before daybreak. And when he's done, when it is done, he takes her to the bathroom, he washes her up and puts her back in bed. So in the morning, she calls the police, she invites the police, but because she's so traumatized, she's somehow incoherent in the account she gives. So the following morning, the police people came again and they tried to interview her. What she's saying today is actually different from what she said yesterday. So eventually, they say probably she dreamt about it and she imagined it and it didn't happen. So she was humiliated. But this man does not stop at this woman. So he goes into another woman's home to rape her. And this case, the second case, this woman takes a particular time to ensure that she looks at him very well. She discovers, for instance, that he has a tattoo on his arm, that he even has a birthmark on his birthmark on his leg. And so she's able to explain these things to the police. And eventually this man, is brought to justice. So what I'm saying is this, that if not because Moremi is able to go the extra mile to get the evidence, her case might be difficult to prove. And for other students, it may not necessarily be to do it the particular way Moremi has done it, but to find ways, of ensuring that you have evidence, and that you are determined to fight, so that the students themselves can give themselves privileges that the university lecturer has not given to them. Thank you.
Yeah, can I add something
Thank you
to
very
that?
much.
If you don't mind.
Okay, I think okay,
Okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
So after asked,
go on, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. So what I want to say is that, I applaud Moremi's fighter spirit and everything, but I think we cannot overlook the fact that that comes from her privilege and from her upbringing, because she was raised, she traveled around, her family, her father was an ex-ambassador, like a diplomat and everything. And even what she's studying at the university kinds of gives her this ability to to weigh in on things. She's studying international relations. She's studying conflicts management and all of that. So I think that also provides her with like a certain knowledge on how to handle things, how to use language in a certain way, and so on. So when we look at the case of the girl who was in Dakar and who ended up dying after, her encounter with Mr. Njare, and we compare her to what Moremi was able to accomplish, I don't think we can say that privilege doesn't play a role in this. And I think also one other thing that is, why is it that it's up to the student to go investigate this and bring the proof for that the institution can recognize what is happening? What is the institution doing to protect their students? What are the mechanisms on place that will handle this type of situation? Moremi is able to go all the way back to Dakar because she can speak French. She can go investigate. She has the money to buy a plane ticket and do that and come back right away. Bring the man that will be, her saving grace and all of that. And even at the end, the fact that Moremi got out of that session victorious is, in my opinion, problematic in many ways, because that's not the reality. I understand that, this is the movie and we want happy endings in some situation, but the reality is that this is not what's happening in real life. So I would have more like to see that struggle and that bad ending in some way, so that we get the conversation going. Because the way it's looking like is that, okay, when you are in this type of situation, if you bring the evidence, okay, the university is going to do something for you, which is not the case. Even during that session, she had to repeatedly defend herself. She was being coerced in terms of how she was answering those questions, what type of language was appropriate for her to use, how she was expressing her anger, etc., etc. So even her coming back from Dakar and having all this proof against this man, still the university, those people who embodied this institution still were kind of conveying and reinforcing these norms on her. So I think there's a problem over there. Her privilege does have a role in what is happening in this movie, and that's not the storyline. That's not the experiences of most of the people who went through this sexual harassment.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Adela.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also just want to pitch this in, is that in looking at Moremi as a character, we also should not miss the greater import of the message. Like, while I feel like, yeah, the aspect of asking a student to go look for evidence and things is a little much of a labor, but I also don't want to nitpick that in the sense that it's still drama, right? And we're trying to show a very empowered woman who takes this initiative, which is the point of the story. But I think even sometimes when we're not dealing with an empowered student, like doesn't have the background, the privileged background, we should also consider that this is also a journey, right? Every story is about somebody that leaves home in the morning and returns as a different subject, right? So this is a young, naive woman, has all of these resources in the film, and then at the end of the day, she uses it very well. And she was able to defend herself and also become like the poster girl for every other girl that is going through that. That is the stuff of heroism, right? Although I don't agree with the part of the lone individual hero, but that's another thing entirely. But then again, the film also contains other messages of empowerment that I don't think should be missed, right? In focusing on Moremi, right? You have this lecture where Indiare himself, the hypocrite, was telling the student that attack all the things that I'm teaching you. Don't just agree with the things that I say. This is not dogma, right? That's very significant, right? Like he's saying, I represent this institutional figure, represent systems, go against it, breach it, rupture it, right? That is one thing that I consider very powerful message. It's what even makes it even more powerful is the irony of who it's coming from. This is an abuser, right? Who is using the power the institution has bestowed on him. But he's also saying something, attack the things that I'm teaching you. Then if you look at the final scene in the classroom where they applauded this Moremi, you see that the same lecture that was going on was also on international borders and autonomy of countries, right? That was another message, right? Like respecting borders of each country. Like except in this case, we're talking about human bodies as a country that needs to be respected, right? So we should also assume that other students might not have the kind of social background that Moremi has, but they are in the spaces where these kind of messages are going on, and they are empowering messages. So in looking at empowerment as family background, as knowledge, we should also look at the processes of acquiring certain kinds of privileges and insight and knowledge itself that the university is imbuing on the student and how it empowers. How Moremi's story plays out is one thing, but also the other things that the less privileged student can take away from you, right? The things that they teach you, the things that this institution pass across to you, how you can use it to destroy the same systems of oppression that operate in that university. That's a lesson that we shouldn't miss too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you so much to every member of the panelists for bringing this diverse perspective to talking about this complex but very stimulating topic. We have a question in the Q&A box. So this question, I will give the name of the person who is asking the question later. I would like our tech team to please provide that to me. But the question, the person begins by saying they appreciate towards about they said, however, from dramaturgical perspective, the use of Duex Machina to solve the problem in the film is like concluding that the problem can only be solved majorly through divine interventions rather than human intervention. This is interesting, especially when you remember that character that says, I believe Jesus will intervene. The two scenes where the Duex Machina is used here first, when the boy appears and takes Moremi away from others. Second, when an anonymous person throws in a wrapped paper through the window of the hotel where Moremi is staying. The person's question is, why the use of Duex Machina? I think this is going directly to Mr. Babatunde. Instead of creating characters like Gloria to support Cardoso as witness in order to show that human beings can confront and solve problems. Is power and knowledge, privilege beyond what human beings alone can confront? I hope that is not a...
Hello. Yes. No. Hello. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Can I? Okay, great. I don't normally like defending my work. I always avoid Q&A sessions and stuff like that because I like to put it out there and let other people work out. Just like Dr. Adulakum made mention of the fact that there were instances of, the lecture where he's talked about dogma and challenge it, stuff. So this film is full of metaphors, and I love it when other people work out what the metaphors are. So I'm not really a person like to kind of go out there and defend my work, but I will answer this question. There is no use of Duex Machina in Citation. The boy who led her away, if you pay really good attention to the film, he was told to lead her away by the professor who wanted to take her somewhere where he could be alone with her. We don't see the professor telling the boy to do it. It is obvious from the way the professor is looking at the boy, leading her away, that he is part and parcel of that whole movement. And the fact that he turns up right beside her at the cliff edge, looking out across the sea and the beautiful view of the city, it goes to show that, yeah, he was part and parcel of that. That's the first thing. Secondly, the paper that comes through that's thrown through the window by somebody anonymous, well, think about, I would say to that person, go back and watch the film again. Who was she talking to before the paper came through the door? She was talking to Professor Sembene. the university, the dean of international relations at the, and she had told him you had privileged information about the address of this Cardoso and where I can find him. And he told her, sorry, I'm not going to give you that information because, you know, I'm not going to help you bring down the career of a good man. After which he told him, do you know how I met, or how, do you know how my close relationship with Professor Indiari started? And the guy looks at her and he goes, well, I taught him how to drive a car with a manual gear. That there is a big reveal, because let's remember one thing. The car that Professor Ndiaye used to use when he was a lecturer at the University of Senegal is still parked right in front of Sembene's house. And it's a manual gear shift car. So from that, Professor Sembene must have, as soon as she walked away, Professor Sembene would have thought, hold on a second, maybe this is not so black and white as I thought. Maybe there's some gray areas there. You know what? If she wants to find this Cardoso guy, I'm going to give her the address. And so he's the one that sends the letter or the drops the note. It's not somebody anonymous. I think it's pretty obvious to anybody who pays really particular close attention to film that Professor Sembene changed his mind as a result of finding out that Moremi taught Professor Ndiaye how to drive a car with manual gear shift, and he knows that Professor Ndiaye has been driving a car with manual gear shift for over 20 years. So, you know, that's when you realize it's not so black and white, and he's the one that goes and drops the notes there. We don't see him do it, but it's pretty obvious considering the fact that she had gone to him to ask for that very thing. So, sorry, man, no Deus Ex Machina there. Try and pay, watch the film again, pay particular attention this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. And the person who asked that question is Dr. Rashid Odtun. Thank you very much for your question. Very thoughtful. So we have a question from someone in the audience, Yewande Hadi. Mosun, can I go on and just read?
Yes, yes.
So Yewande Hadi says, I am curious about perspectives on the portrayal of other women in the film outside of Moremi. Moremi's legal representation seemed a bit weak. Our close friend abandoned her. The twin fans are cute, but not major additions. The women on the judicial committee function with some sense of neutrality, except for the students' rep, who antagonizes her. Moremi exhibits a great deal of agency on her own, but she didn't have any allies among this group. In fact, several of our most helpful allies were men. The professor in France, our close friends in Ghana, the Cape Verdean that testified. Yewande is wondering if anyone else shares similar perspective or similar sentiment. I'll throw that to the rest of the panel. Anybody want to jump on this one?
Okay, yes. May I say something, please?
Well, can
you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. Well, I don't know about this. This general belief, the belief that women do not support themselves, that women are the worst critics of other women and all that and all that. For me, what I would say is that in relation to this film, I think it shows the complexity of the matter at hand. How everybody is not expected to see things the way Moremi sees them. When you look at sexual harassment, for instance, look at the definition of sexual harassment. One of the definitions says that is an unwelcome, when on behavior from a man to a woman, when it's unwelcome, when it is humiliating, when it is intimidating. Now, this is very complex. When does a sexual advance become unwelcome? If you look at Moremi's closest friend, the character played by Iniedo, I find her character very, very interesting and significant. Contrary to what people might think that it is a minor role, but I think it is very major. We see a situation where this girl, that is Moremi's friend, says that from the moment she set her eyes on Professor, she says, I have met the father of my unborn children. She likes the professor. She does not think the way Moremi thinks. She does not see things the way Moremi sees things. And she's entitled to her perspective. The Christian is entitled to her own perspective. So it's a complex web. So it shows the complexity. And I think one of the significance of this film is to let us know that actually the issue of sexual assault and sexual abuse is really, really complex and deep. I know many lecturers, many male lecturers, for instance, who are married to their former students. They met these students, they fell in love with them, and these former students have become the center of their world. They love them truly. Now, it is even more interesting that that character, Maremi's friend, does not say that she likes the professor because she wants the professor to upgrade her scores, but because she actually fancies the man as becoming her husband. And there are many girls who come to the university and they find, their own, they find partners for life. So I think in my view, the film is trying to explain, to show us, I don't want to play into the idea that women don't support themselves, or that the reason Moremi is alone or is misunderstood or is not supported is because women always fight themselves. I don't want to believe that. Even look at the character played by Joke Silva, where at a point Moremi begins to doubt the sincerity of the NGO, that they will only use me as material to become famous. Now, but beyond that, the character played by Joke Silva raises a very fundamental issue, which is that her own husband, persistently wooed her, before she agreed. And that if it was now, it will seem like he was sexually harassing her. So the film throws up a lot of questions about the changes that are happening in our cultures, how cultures are changing, how we are looking, how we are becoming more and more individualistic in the way we look at things, in the way we respond to problems, and that we should not expect everybody to respond to a situation the same way we want to. That does not legitimize their own perspective. It is to try to understand where they're coming from and to see, how we can understand one another. That's why, for me, I always love gender relations, because see, in gender relations, we have the opportunity to bring these issues up. How does the woman feel in this kind of a situation? How does the man feel? How can we reconcile? So these are the issues. It is not, I don't think it is because Moremi is envied or Moremi is despised, by her colleagues, by female colleagues. I think it is just because they have their own perspectives, they have their own expectations, they have their own aspirations. Those characters' aspiration to be married to a lecturer is legitimate. In Nigeria, there are many students who have married lecturers, and this is genuine, this is real. So that's my opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Akonde. Thank you for this wonderful insight. And I want to believe that there are other members on the panel who have an opinion about this topic. Anybody wants to come in?
Yeah, can I come in here?
Thank you, Professor Zobo.
Yeah, I want to talk about this issue of setting up panels or a kind of a committee. Most universities have these committees. I know where I am, there's a committee that takes care of complaints by students or even staff. So in this committee this time now is a woman who is the head of the committee, if you remember, the woman professor, who has her profile is intimidating too. And when I looked at that committee, because I've been a member of such a committee, I think that they are quite fair and objective. You see, you do not assume that either Professor Lucien is guilty or that Moremi is guilty. I think they gave them opportunity to talk about issues. And you remember, even when Professor Lucien saw the lab technologists from Senegal who had come to give evidence after Moremi went to see him, you can see he tried to stop that man from coming in or even speaking, but the woman said no, cautioned him, and asked him to sit down. So I think that that committee was objective enough, and that the women in that committee, I think they gave a good chance for justice to be done. And as soon as they saw that evidence, it was very convincing evidence that Moremi profiled at the end. And as soon as they saw it, there was no, I do not agree with somebody who said that they were still hedging. No, no, no. As soon as that evidence was clear, it was brought, they saw clearly that the professor was guilty. And you can see also their decision. And now I want to talk about the young woman, the other student who fancied the professor. That is also common. We must not, even as we discuss sexual harassment, we must realize that sexual harassment works different ways. Sometimes I agree that students actually harass lecturers, because some lecturers, when I was head of department, had come to me to say that some students were harassing them, those that wanted marks to be passed. And some of them would say, anything you want, sir, anything. So that is some kind of sexual harassment. So it works different ways, not just only men harassing women. Sometimes women do it. It can also work other ways, that men can also harass men. So sexual harassment works in different ways. And the girl, I don't remember her name in the film, but it was her role was played by Iniedo. That girl, as Dr. Konde said, is rather very complex. And there are girls, there are women, young women like that in the system, where they want to get lecturers. And she was told, Moremi reminded her that Professor Lucien was a married man, but she didn't bother her. So I'm not even sure it was marriage she wanted. She might just fancy him and wanted to have a good time with him. And yes, as Dr. Konde pointed out, there is no evidence that she wanted marks from him or for him to pass her or help her with her project or anything of the sort. I think she just fancied the man. And of course, we know that man is quite attractive. And I wouldn't be surprised if students found him rather attractive. So, but what baffled me was the way she came out boldly to testify against her friend, saying that Moremi was infatuated with the man, when Moremi had consistently consistently told her even to keep away, and that she was not interested, that she remembered that the man was married. So that is again part of what we see in characters. It could be her nature, the way she betrayed a fellow, a classmate, and somebody whom we assumed at the beginning of the film was a good friend. I mean, we see them together most of the time. So that again it's a twist in the film, but there are characters like that.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, I really commend the filmmaker, and the scriptwriter Tunde Babalola. I think they did a good job in bringing out these various strands and the complexity in this kind of situation or relationship, as Dr. Konde pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ezigbo. I want to stay on the topic of the character of Iniedo, the character that Iniedo plays. My question will go to Dr. Adelakun and ask to, if you have any contribution, you can chime in. We remember that moment when Joke Silva and Temi Otedola, the complainant and our legal representative at the restaurant, she told him, Joke Silva, told her that, my husband, I met him in university and all of that. And I think that this also has to do with power play, the thin line. Dr. Adelakun, I want you to help us complicate this issue further. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I don't think that it's that complicated, right? The question that, the point that Joke Silva, the lawyer, raised with the girl, it seemed to me like pointless if you look at it within the context of the film. She talked about how the person that was her boss, tried like 3 times before she finally agreed to go out with him. And then she said there's a thin line between wooing and harassment. And I disagree. There is no thin line, at least in the film, there's no such thin line. Number one is that, yes, it's possible for you to like somebody that works under you, right? And wooing doesn't mean the person has to fall at once. But there is a level at which, yes, we agree that some of these things go beyond proper bounds, right? After some time, you should be able to pull off, especially if you're the boss. But in the case of this film, that wasn't even what happened at all. And it's simply a person who is in this position of power trying to abuse a younger person. And I think it's very important to keep all of those things separate. When the lawyer said this present world or the context in which we live, I was thinking, wait a minute, what timeline is she referring to? Because if she's looking at a post-Me Too world where people now say, how do you woo a woman without being accused of sexual abuse or harassment? I will say that's not it. That's not what occurred in this film. Right? The thing that we'll see in this, and this is a very good point which Dr. Akonde made, right? Like there are students who genuinely desire lecturers because the person is brilliant, is good looking, he represents something that you desire. And we cannot overlook the fact that in a closed space like the university might be a universe, but it's also a closed space, right? So when you see someone like that, you can genuinely feel something for them. It's the same way we feel things for our pastors, we feel things for film stars, right? Like we like them, they represent something. When somebody stands on the stage and is talking and is so brilliant and so well-traveled, it's possible to desire him. But that's where the thin line is now. There's a very thin line between somebody actually liking a person and then the kind of abuses that can be perpetrated in that kind of context. And I think one way to resolve it is for everybody to be mandated. If you're a lecturer, you want to date your student, you should be mandated to report yourself to the dean of your head of your department. Say, I'm interested in a relationship with this student and I'm putting it forward, right? So if you have nothing to hide, if you have genuine intentions, you should have no problem saying it, right? You are certain where you are going with it, right? Like I asked my male friends lecturer who say like student harassers, they come to us, they're always throwing things in our face. Like someone would say that my students send me messages and things. So I asked them, like, if your university asks you to sign an undertaking that if you have a relationship with this student and she comes forward in future and says that you abused her, you will take all the responsibility. Will you still go ahead and have a sexual relationship with them? They say no. Right? So 1 minute, this person is saying that, oh, this woman harassed me so much, I had to give in because I'm helpless. But the moment you tell them, like, what if it becomes a legal issue and you are going to be the one blamed? You sign an undertaking that you take responsibility. They say no. They say they can't go ahead, right? So the reason they could go ahead is not because the women harassed them, but because there are no boundaries set in those kind of relationships. The moment you set boundaries and you say, anytime the student comes back and says she's the victim, you will be the one to pay for it because you are the one in power. You will see that it will change the tenor of the tone of the discussion. The reason a lot of lecturers claim that they are being harassed by students is because there are no proper boundaries set in those kind of things. It's not, unless the student is the one to award you grades or write a reference letter for you or promote you, there's no way she can harass you. If she calls your phone number, block her, right? You know this Monica Osagie, who had a problem with, who had a similar relationship with the professor in OAU, right? And it's very interesting that the film itself was set in OAU. The professor went to jail in 2018 and was just released March this year. One of the evidences the professor gave as an example of this student harassed me was WhatsApp messages they were exchanging. But doesn't change the question. Why are you exchanging WhatsApp messages with your student? You should have blocked her, right? If she's asking you anything or saying anything, it is your responsibility as a professor to cut it short. So I don't think there is, the question that lawyer Joke Silva raised is relevant as much as the fact that there are no kind of boundaries that are set in this relation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hastu, you have anything at all to add?
Yeah, I can add something. I mean, the way I understood that comment was kind of to talk about how time has changed and how understanding of situation and concept also have changed. That was how I read that comment. And one thing that I wanna touch on is related like the silence of the university and the other students. I feel like we take it for granted that everybody understands what sexual harassment is, and we have a clear definition of it across the board, which is not the case. I think some students come into this setting with no knowledge of those type of concept, and they haven't encountered it. I mean, they have encountered it, but it's not named most of the time. It's not a big deal for them because it has been normalized across the board in some ways. So I think the silence of these other one who don't really care about what Moremi is doing and who are not there to support her is also, it speaks to the fact that like we need to raise awareness about what sexual harassment is, what like rape is, because you still nowadays have people who debate about these things, whether it was rape, whether it was sexual harassment or not. So I think we need to be more careful about that. And I think the film does a good job in capturing that, the fact that we don't all have the same understanding of what sexual harassment is. The same way I feel in my understanding what Moremi's friend was doing is some type of harassment. But why is it when it's a man who's doing it, we call it sexual harassment, but when it's a woman who does it, like it's, you know, it's another name. For me, it's the same thing. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Asto. Mosun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aston. Thank you to everyone for your responses. So I'm just going to read Yewande Adi's comment. Here she says, I find it quite telling that a question about the portrayal of women characters in a story about a female student being raped by the male professor is met with responses about how female students make advances towards male professors or that legitimate relationships develop from such affairs. And this feedback is by women. So I think like this is in response to the fact that, some of the like Morami's relationship with our friends and also with Professor Lucien is to some extent being legitimized. So I don't know if the panelists have a response to that, but we have another question from YouTube, and this person says, is there a lesson here for schools, African universities? I'm especially interested in the issue that Professor Ezigbo raised. What should HOD do if a weak student, quote, weak student, reports such a case to her? So this question is for Professor Ezigbo.
Yeah, thank you
Okay.
very much. Yeah, I want to say, and I said this before, most universities in Nigeria, the one where I am, they have committees that are in charge of attending to complaints about sexual harassment. And also when students return, especially the first year students, they are mentored. I know that in that university, the Women's Society organized series of seminars, bring in lawyers, all women, established women who are established in their workplaces or in different professions. They are brought, they organize weeks, a week where students are mentored and told their rights, that they have a right to complain. So I don't want us to think that these things are not taken care of, even though we still have cases of sexual harassment. But I want to point out that many universities in Nigeria have zero tolerance for sexual harassment. But the problem, as I said, is sometimes the female students or those who are being harassed don't speak up as more immediate. Many of them may just ignore it or even consent or out of fear, as I said earlier. So what we need to do is to continue to mentor these young people, to continue to tell them that they don't have to accept harassment. They can speak up. They have a voice. They can speak up. and report. Because most universities will take care of it. I want to say that. And again, what the question you asked, I do not think that it was wrong to point out this issue of sometimes female students harassing lecturers. It is real. We cannot but voice this out. It's true that maybe a small percentage does this, but it is done. And as we mentor the students in my university, we also talk about this. We also advise them. If you are weak, you can form study groups where other students can help you. You can even approach, there are lecturers and students know lecturers who want to help them, who have no interest or sexual interest in them. Many of them know lecturers who are this way and they go to them if they have problems. So I think that there are policies and strategies put in place to help students who really want to benefit from knowledge about sexual harassment and how to deal with it.
Thank you very much, Professor Ezebo. So we have other questions from Tomide and from Matthew Brown. But before that, we have this question
Sorry,
for
excuse me. Sorry,
yeah.
please.
Please.
Let me make a comment
Okay.
about Yewande's question, about whether we are trying to legitimize sexual harassment or what Gloria, that is in Edo's character, what she does. I just want to explain that I have not, or we are not trying to say that whatever Gloria does, that one is trying to legitimize. It's about trying to understand, to say that if Gloria refuses to support her friend when she ought to, what are the possible reasons that she's not doing what she ought to do? Not to legitimize what she does or to say what she has done is right. It's like in Shakespeare's Macbeth kills King Duncan. And okay, in the play we know that it is because his wife instigated him, says don't want to become king. So when we try to understand why Macbeth kills King Duncan, we are not therefore trying to say that what Macbeth has done is right, or that it is the blame should go to Mrs. Macbeth. No, but that there are people tend to think differently. They tend to have different perspectives. And it is necessary to try to understand their perspective. We don't necessarily have to agree with this perspective of theirs, but at least to try to understand. And that I think that encourages us to do. That every character should be understood. Why is this character behaving this way? Gloria has she has an agenda, she has a design on the professor, and this is why she's doing what she's doing. And we are saying that the film does not provide sufficient evidence to show that this design is because she wants grades, she wants to upgrade her scores. So no, it's not to legitimize what Gloria has done. It's just to show that people behave differently and they have different perspectives. And it is necessary for us to try to understand them so that we can resolve some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So this next question is to Mr. Tunde Babalola. I think he has to leave soon. So the question is, before the judicial panel starts, Moremi's lawyer, played by Joke Silva, tells Moremi that as a lawyer, she cannot address questions to the panel, the witnesses, and the respondents since it's a closed hearing. So one assumes that in this hearing, Moremi must be the one to defend herself. So was this a deliberate decision to amplify the victim's voice?
Okay, you can hear me, right? It wasn't a deliberate decision. I mean, I based that whole setup of the panel on research I'd done in various universities, not just here in Nigeria, but across the world. I just went online and researched how disciplinary hearings or tribunals or panels are set up and what are the rules. In fact, most universities have different rules. I just chose to use this one because, like you said, I wanted to kind of give her a good voice. I wanted her to hear her voice as opposed to some lawyer speaking on her behalf. However, in that same discussion before the panel between the Joker Silva character And Morimi, I think the Joko Silva character did tell her, listen, I can whisper you advice. And also can for the lawyer, for the defendant, we can whisper advice and you can talk back to me, but I just can't address the panel directly. And there was a lot of whispering going on both sides, from the lawyers to their clients. But I really like that system because you said earlier, it does give the victim a voice. I want a lawyer speaking more than the victim in that kind of setting. So that's why I went for that kind of panel, which I believe, I can't be certain, but I think it's from a university in Ghana that actually uses that system of panel. And I just felt that suits my story better. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. So I think we have a comment from our anonymous attendee, and she says,
Sure.
Professor Akachi, I was once sexually harassed by a lecturer. He would call the vice chancellor in my presence to show me how powerful he was. Mark you, the vice chancellor was a woman. So if those young girls do not report, it is because they feel they have no power. Nobody can listen. And I think like it's also very important to acknowledge this. This is from our anonymous attendee. All right, so Michael, please, you can ask.
Yes, thank you so much to our anonymous SND for that comment. We have a number of comments and questions, and we have little time. So I am just going to lay them bare and then let our panelists pick them up from whatever perspective they have. They can address it. There's a question from Tomide Ulurumbi. There's another from Matthew Brown. So I will ask Matthew Brown's question and then Tomide's. I would like to hear the panelists' perspective on the role that the Okon twins play in the story. The way in which this present discussion wants to treat Moremi's story as a political chess piece. But what is the film saying about the imposition of political agendas on an individual's choice or individual's choices? Is this about solidarity, failed or not, or something else? That is a question from Matthew Brown. And I hope that our panelists take note of that. The second question from Tomide is this. They thank the panelists for their contribution and they say, I think it's important to think about the nuances of agency in the movie. The professor enjoyed an absolute agency until the Senegalese witness appeared. At what point do knowledge industry players and university administrators begin to engage the patriarchy of Nigerian social policies in the Nigerian context? Does the agency of NDIAs obscure? Does it threaten? Does it constrain Moremi's agency? We have these two questions and we would like our panelists to pick up from whatever perspective. Thank you because of the time we have.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah. So I want to respond to the anonymous comment about the experience she had, where a lecturer would call a vice chancellor and speak to him or to her just to show how powerful he is. I can relate with that. It is very sad. And unfortunately, this is what is going on in Nigerian universities today. The setting of the choice of OAU as one of the settings for citation is very significant in this respect, because I'm not aware of any Nigerian university today that is as responsive to cases of sexual harassment as OAU. Now, I could share a personal experience to support this comment. I mean, this position of this experience of this anonymous person. When I was in my undergraduate days, a lecturer said he wanted to date me, and I said no. I was in year 3, it was the beginning of year 3. In the second semester in year 3, they would assign us to supervisors. And I suddenly discovered that I was assigned to this man, the same man who wanted to date me. So I went to him and I said, did you do this deliberately? And he said, yes. And if you don't agree, you are not going to graduate from this school. Now, this story is recreated in one of my novels, Where Are You From? So what did I do? What I did was to go home and first I spoke to him and I told him that nothing was going to change, that I was prepared to fail. And I left. And when my other mates were going to see their supervisors, I refused to go to him. And I told them at home that this was what was happening and that I might not graduate. And unfortunately, I didn't come from a family that was powerful enough to intervene on my behalf. My father was a farmer who never went to school. My mother never went to school. She was a petty trader. So I was on my own, but I was determined not to do it. So eventually, at the end of the day, this lecturer had to call me to say, oh, you are stubborn, this, that, and then he allowed me to go without me doing what he wanted me to. So what this lady has said is correct. They are very powerful. Even as a lecturer, it would interest you to know that I got into the department and a professor called me and told me that if I didn't give sex to him, I would not be promoted. So these things are happening. But again, I told the man that I didn't need promotion, that I have already been promoted. If I could get a PhD, what further promotion do I need? So there are ways in which we just have to try to deal with this situation, but the situation is it can be very overwhelming and very sorrowful. So I can relate with this. But I'm also pleading with every woman, every girl who is undergoing this kind of experience to pick up this courage and to call their bluff. Because as I found out, sometimes they are not actually as powerful as they claim to be. That woman, that lecturer, that male lecturer who would call the female vice chancellor, when the chips are down, he can't face that female vice chancellor to say, I want to sleep with that student. Because even the vice chancellor knows the implication. The tragedy of the Nigerian university system is that many of these cases do not get to management. They just threaten you and you believe what they are telling you. But it is not always true. But if you are not strong, and you are not ready, you capitulate, they take advantage of you. So it takes extra strength and courage to be a female student in a Nigerian university. It is just that bad. So every Nigerian female student must be that courageous and must be that strong to speak up and to hope for the best in the final analysis. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akonde. Because of our time, we are going to appeal to other panelists to keep their comments as brief as they can. But putting in mind Tomide's question and Brown's question, I would throw it out again to the panelists. Please keep your comments as.
Thank you. Can I just say something briefly here? I want to say that sexual harassment is not just a Nigerian thing. It's everywhere. I mean, I've been abroad and taught in a few universities. It's everywhere. It's not only in Nigeria. But I also agree that those who are victims should learn to be strong and report. And we encourage girls, young women, to report. Whoever is being sexually harassed should not be afraid. I agree with that. Sometimes it's fear that makes people refuse to report. If they report, I think that something could be done. Now, I want to talk briefly about the question you asked about Professor Lucien's agency as opposed to Moremi's agency and the patriarchy. Well, one thing I want to say about that situation in Citation, patriarchy, yes, is very strong. And even in the Nigerian university system, where even in the so-called female oriented faculties like humanities and social sciences, where you have more female students than male students, you find that most of the lecturers are still male. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do is to make sure we employ more female lecturers, because I think that many of them mentor female students and teach them a lot. But I want to say that the position of Professor Lucian is, in that panel where they were trying him or investigating the case Moremi brought, he's a professor, and he deserves to be accorded all respect. So it's not as if the panel really wanted the case to go for him, but they gave him the respect of his position and his status, a renowned professor. But I want to point out also that that panel did not do that to favor him. I believe that they were objective in listening to everybody. So let us not, what is important in cases of sexual harassment, from my experience as somebody who has been in the system, is that you need to have evidence. Maybe this is where many young women cannot come out. Sorry, my light has just, NEPA has just struck, but I hope you can hear my voice.
You can hear your voice.
So you just have to have evidence. In my university, a girl who had evidence, she won. The lecturer was expelled last year. He was expelled, the male lecturer. So evidence is very important. Just make sure you have evidence. If you have evidence, like Moremi had, the case is settled. I do not believe that things are against you because you are a student and lecturers gang up against you. No. If you have evidence, that will help.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Ozibo. Does any of our panelists want to jump on Matthew Brown's or Tomide's question specifically?
Yeah, so there are three questions, so I'm just going to speak across them, so to save time. First is Kayode Odumbomi. Sorry if I mangled your name. I think you raised a very important issue of determination, right? That we shouldn't put the stress of self-determination on the student. And I think it's very important because one thing that we must not fail to highlight is socialization processes. So we come from societies where we venerate elders too much, or people that we think are elders. And at such, it can be very intimidating, asking somebody to come out, be determined, to be strong, go out and confront institutions. Look, it looks very good and easy in films. In real life, it's very hard for one person to stand against institutions. Your face will be on the internet forever. Everywhere you go, you wear the mark of Cain. That is the person that pulled down the lecturer. And let's not even forget that there's the issue of shame. Shame is a very powerful controlling instrument in our society. So I agree. And that brings me to the next thing about the issue of accountability. Like a system can run like an automatic gear that okay, look at that scene in the film where they were talking about manual versus automatic gear, right? So you can have a system that runs like an automatic gear that the level of human control on it is reduced. And that's one thing you see with university systems where they have all these committees to deal with sexual harassment. They've automated the process in a way that might not even see the human being and the kind of vulnerability that they have to go through to be able to make a case. That's very important to put in focus. Now, one thing one of the first scenes in the film was where the committee asked the student that had caused the death of a professor, why didn't you come to us? And my first thought is, no, you should be asking yourself that question, not the student, right? Why couldn't this student come to us? Why couldn't they report? Because there could be like between the student and the processes that you've created to prevent them, there could be a lot of institutional bureaucratic problems that makes it hard for them to come to you. And so the next thing they want to do is to take the law in their hands. You're saying, oh, we have this process, but is the process functioning with the level of empathy and the efficiency, the kind of necessary efficiency with which is functioning? Those are questions administrators should regularly ask themselves. So you can't just put it off on we can't put it all on the student and say, you should be strong, you should go out, you should challenge. But there is also the aspect of institution. Yes, for institution to develop their methods to finesse it properly, they need students to report. But we also have to understand that reporting somebody, especially if you come from the kind of background where some of us come from, it's a very, very difficult thing. So yes, there should be a way to make all of these things possible, right? It's not just that the bureaucracy is there, but how can you handle it? Also, another thing that I shouldn't forget is also handling microaggressions. So you go into your professor's office, he talks about the color of your panties. You can't go to the institution and start to talk, right? But those are the kind of things that happen in small, they call them microaggressions, right? You cannot go pull the professors and the Senate committee and say the professor talked about the color of my pant, right? You have to wait for something big. And sometimes some of these things don't develop into something very spectacular. It's all this small harassment, pressure that it wears you off. You're carrying all this kind of emotional labor that you're not supposed to do. That's a problem. Now, one other thing, I think I said that earlier, that I have the issue that I had with the film is the way it made it look as if Professor Lucien Indiare and Professor Grillo are aberrant abusers. There is no human institution where you have abuses that people are usually like just one person doing things. It's not an individual pathology. It succeeds because there are always enablers, right? But you don't see the enablers, and we need to keep that in mind, right? There are always people who help these things to happen. There are people who look elsewhere. There are professors that feel like, yeah, I need this person to vote for me next time I'm going for something, or this person is going to write my recommendation letter for me, or is going to do me one a favor. And then they keep quiet. There are women in those situations too that they also cannot talk because there are so many things that are attached. That's the way institution function. A lot of give and take that make people look away. That's why those things succeed, not because one person coming from outside does something. And then the question of Matthew Brown, I think it's a very interesting one, because the accompaniments, I felt like, yeah, it's a nice comic side relief of these campus ideologues. And but it's also an important question of our imposition of political agenda. I think there is no way you can avoid that. Every political movement, every radical movement eventually becomes something like, it creates all kinds of spaces of value for different kinds of people. There are some people that are coming into it because they want to use you for other reasons. Some other people see you as a bridge, right? So there's a scene where this Ghanaian guy, sorry, I can't recall his name, says that every girl on campus now sees you as this model, right? So you've created a space for them to be able to talk about things that they couldn't talk about before. You've breached the walls of the institution. There are some of these idealists that are on campus that they are going through this, they've discovered new things about ideologies, and then they see you as the person that represents it. People will try to impose all kinds of agenda on you. There is really nothing you can do about it. It's always it's to keep the eye on the goal. What is the goal here? It is to prevent sexual harassment, sexual abuse. It is for me to be vindicated against this abusive professor. And that's it. That's just keep the eye there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that brilliant contribution. And on this note, we'll end the program and the discussion. But before we end, I'd like to just point to the fact that we have comments and questions about the need for institutional change, and I think this is something that we should take away from this panel. So we'll ask our panelists like just to share one or two sentences, your final words, and what you want the attendees here today to take away from this discussion. So we'll start with Professor Akachi, and then Dr. Lola Akonde, and Dr. Ambimbola, and Mr. Tunde Babalola, and finally us too. Thank you so much.
Yes, I want to say that the conversation can continue, and we should bring these issues to our people's awareness. And those of us who mentor young women, we must continue to do this. And I also want to say that power should be used properly. We should not abuse power. Power, there is always power manifesting in different forms. Let us use power properly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For me, I'm very happy that Professor Ezigbo is here with us because today she's one of those people who are privileged to influence policy decisions at university level. It is very important for our universities to be genuinely committed to fighting sexual assault. Most of them just have this zero tolerance for sexual abuse in their books. They do not put effective institutional framework for complaints to be made and for justice to be received by victims. So the reason the average Nigerian female student has to be strong is because there are there's no institutional support, there's no institutional protection, and this is a tragedy. So it is very important that our justice system has to work, it has to function, and the universities must be truly committed to fighting it the way OAU is doing. All other Nigerian universities need to follow, the footsteps of OAU, and this will bring a lot of changes, a lot of relief to Nigerian female students who are agonizing presently. It is the lack of institutional protection that is the tragedy here. So we need to work on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okonde. Dr. Abi.
Thank you very much. First, I must thank the organizers for providing this session. I really enjoyed speaking to everyone. To the other panelists, thanks for those illuminating, very insightful ideas. And thanks to our audience who have been engaging us in the chat places. This is a really productive conversation for me. I've learned a lot of things, and I'm really grateful to everyone. I think my own final words would be to, in addition to everything that Dr. Akonde and Dr. Akachi have said, it is also to support one another, right? Like one of the reasons some of these habits have thrived in this institution is because people have not provided enough support or moral cover for those that get exposed, right? It's a very vulnerable path to walk, to say you want to take on an institution. And sometimes you find that even your best friends are the one of people against you. So when we find other women who are in all of these situations, not to abandon them to the overwhelming power of the institution, but to support them emotionally, morally, spiritually, to help them go through that path, because the things they fight for is going to come back to all of us. And also to make this very important point that the culture of sexual abuse, like people have rightly pointed out, it's not limited to Nigerian universities, all over the world. Wherever you find power, you always find people who want to abuse it. And knowledge, if knowledge is a form of power, they will also want to abuse knowledge itself as a form of power. We should not forget that. But the reason we talk so much about universities is also because they represent something, right? Rationality, enlightenment, humanism, and that's why we pick up on them. If this institution fails in its moral responsibility to the society, the rest of the society could collapse. And that's why we talk about this we talk about universities, not because they are worse than any other kind of person in the society, but because they represent something. When we say the ivory tower, it's because ivory never rusts, right? It could live forever. And so it is to ensure that this thing that the university represents does not rust, it does not decay. That's it. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tunde Babalola.
It's been a lovely discussion. It's been a great debate. Thank you for the organizers for all of this. It's quite a pleasure to sit back and listen to people dissect and go into the movie. I mean, there are things that have been said today, which even I, as a writer, I had no idea about when I was writing it. So it just goes to show I'm not right. Did I write that? Really? So it's really good. And I just want to say, I think people should just we've got to keep speaking up. We've got to keep speaking up, and the more we speak up, the more I think it will affect change. So yeah, so it's okay, as they say in Yoruba in Nigeria here. So let's speak up.
Thank you very much. And finally, as to
Thank you. So building on what already been said in some sort of way, I think the responsibility lies in the hand on the hand of the university, and I think it starts first by educating others. I think there should be a programs or mechanism that allows students to actually be aware of what harassments are, these different types of harassment, what are the languages that they should look for, to identify these harassments. And I think one other thing that universities should really work on is creating different spaces where victims could go and voice themselves without it being, in the form of this jury, for instance. I'm thinking about health official within the university. They should be able to receive students and have talk to students, help them, get their trauma out. It was appalling to me that during that whole session, there was no, health official. And then Moremi's experience was seen as something that wasn't traumatic, and she was just able to narrate things again. That was a type of violence on her because she was obliged to relive those moments. And I think we really need to be more careful about those things and working towards creating safe spaces where victims can come and share their experiences and have the university support them in the best way possible. So thank you, everybody. I enjoyed this discussion and I look forward to other, talks.
Thank you all so much, and it's been a very engaging and enlightening session. Wish you the very best, and we hope that we can, collaborate in the future and have more stimulating conversations, and hopefully, bring in institutional changes in our countries and all over the world. Thank you so much, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye,
so much.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Mm.